Quick. So we've had a lot of good discussion today, and it's clear that there's a lot more to learn and a lot more questions to ask. I think our next panel is a good one for the people in the room and online. Don't forget, if you're online, to ask questions. I wrote down some of the ones that we asked Linda, so we have some primer for them. Hopefully they were listening. But the other thing we've talked about as a political subs group is providing a FAQ, questions from today or other ones that we receive with some answers. So even after today, if your question doesn't get answered or you think about something when you get home, please reach out to your association that you're a member with, and we'll be sure to add that to the FAQ when we get to that point. But without further ado, I want to introduce our Q&A panel. So we have Aaron Birst with the North Dakota Association of Counties, the Executive Director. We have Stephanie Dassinger Engebretson with the North Dakota League of Cities. She's a Deputy Director and our staff attorney. Then Amy DeKok with the North Dakota School Boards Association, also the Executive Director. So let's give them a round of applause. All right, so lots of discussion today. What do you think? Think it went well so far? So I'm going to start with questions I heard them drill Linda on. And Linda, bless your heart, you did pretty good on those. So I was impressed. I would have deferred to my attorney, I think, most of the time. So let me see here. No mills. So the township question. A township officer asked about the 4-year opt-out provision. And maybe Aaron Birst, I'll put you on the hook for this one. But in my opinion, townships may not need to ask for a 4-year exemption, just because of what the legislature passed. So maybe Aaron, just explain how that would work to townships.
Well, hey everybody. Good to see everybody. First, Keith Peach, stand up. That's Keith Peach. He's the director of Insurance Reserve Fund, which is critically important for all of us, because when we mess this up, he's got to bail us out. So you're going to want to make sure you get to know that guy. He's a heck of a guy, by the way.
But don't mess up, is what we're saying.
Yeah.
That's what he's saying.
Don't mess up. Okay, on the township thing, that is, and I might have a little bit of a disagreement with Linda, who is phenomenal, by the way, on that last question. To me, look at page 22. The only political subdivision recognized as having the yearly vote not to be within the caps is townships. So I don't believe ambulance districts, fire districts have that option. They have the option in section 3B to go on a statewide ballot to get over the caps. But townships have the ability at their annual meeting. I quite frankly think that's kind of weird, because if they're coming in anyway at their annual meeting, I don't know why you would gift yourself a 4-year window or whatnot. But that's the way the law ended up reading. Again, the only thing to remember there is you have to then tell those members, the township members, what the increase is going to be and what the 3% cap would have been. So you have to publish that to your township members. But they are an exception to all the rest of the political subdivisions. Now, again, maybe there is something we're not quite thinking about, but I don't find that specific for the ambulance fire in the bill.
Okay, thanks, Aaron. So then we had this question online about for calculating new growth, with finishing an unfinished basement. Anybody on the stage want to approach that question? No takers, it looks like.
Matt, let me just say this, kind of leading off on that. All three of us have been working on that. Well, all of us, the whole crew at the association, the league, everybody, school boards have been working hard. There is no way in this amount of time we can definitively answer all of your questions, because quite frankly, there's a bunch that won't be answerable, at least in this amount of time. What we're going to do is we're going to set up a frequently asked question page on all of our associations, or at least somehow consolidate that. So keep those questions coming, and all we can do is continue to try our best to answer them. It's always a little weird because attorneys, we technically don't represent your political subdivision, but we also don't want 53 different states attorneys coming up with 53 different legal opinions. So we're going to try to consolidate that and respect everybody's authority as much as possible. but keep those frequently asked questions coming. That will be one of them that we'll have to get to.
All right, go ahead, Linda.
Any new construction that's added in any year to an existing property or a property that didn't exist before is new growth. So if they added basement finish, that value didn't exist the year before, so it gets to be counted as growth. It's only when you do a reassessment project that you raise value that it's not counted as growth, because that portion of the property existed in the previous year. It was taxed in the previous year.
Thank you, Burleigh County Tax Director Al Vietmeyer.
All right, thank you, Burleigh County. Stephanie, you look like you had something to say. Any comment on that?
I was just going to say we're getting help from the audience.
Oh,
Great. This is phone a friend.
Yes, thank you, audience. Maybe we should have you up here. Anyways, so then we had a question over here. I'm understanding my notes finally, but if you had no mills on something before, then you start levying mills on it, and then it goes back to zero. When you try to get it back on the books, what do you do in that case?
So I think the law does allow for, if in a certain mill levy fund, if it is zero at the previous year, to go to the max that year. I think that is some flexibility that the legislature is trusting us with. And I think if it is used in a way that is abusive, or to play games, or to try to inflate a mill levy beyond that cap, that we are going to see ramifications of it in the next legislative session. So I think there is the technical aspect of this, that yes, technically that's allowed, but there's also the political answer to this, that is, be careful with it. We trust you all. You are representing the people that were elected and doing the technical work. But if it is abused, we're going to hear about it and likely get that authority taken away in the next legislative session.
I want to just jump on that a little bit. The origin of that whole provision in the bill came about because when they first said 3% cap on your property tax portion, there were a number of counties that have oil revenue coming in and were able to bring their property tax general fund down to zero. So our pitch was, how could you have 3% on zero? So that was the concept where they said, okay, you're going to get a time where you can get your mills to bring it to what you need to, and that starts the 3%. So in my opinion, the spirit of that was for a one-time strategy for when you were zeroed out. If you're going back and forth to zero something out so then you can go to 20 later on, first off, your voters are probably not going to like it anyway. But I do fear that there would be ramifications coming back next time around. Not suggesting you would do it for, not having a good reason, but it's something to consider.
And I'll just add too, on behalf of schools, on that piece of it, because technically I think we all agreed the language of the law allows you to, if you were zeroed out the year before, you can max it out. It's not subject to the 3% cap. However, we've gotten a clear message from the state leaders that they are watching, and if we are, let's say for example, for schools, if you're levying 8 mills in your miscellaneous fund, and you say, well, I'm going to zero it out this year so that I can max out the full 12 the following year, that I think is, if they see that practice happening, I think we're going to see some pushback even harder next session. So what we've been how we've been talking about this issue with school districts is that, if it's part of your planning where you may have used levying authority some time in the past and haven't been using it for the last few years, I think the law would allow you to max out those levies in that fund and wouldn't be subject to the 3% cap for that first year. It would be included in your calculation after that year and would be subject to the cap. There really isn't a, sweet spot really on whether it's going to be determined to be playing games or not, but I think just be really thoughtful about how you are using that authority that's given to you.
And that goes to the next question we received was, what's the remedy for political subs that don't calculate their cap properly? I mean, there's a law truly silent on it, and then there's the other ramifications, which both of you are just discussing. Anybody want to shine some light on that?
Well, I don't think there is not a penalty that's provided in 1176, and I don't believe there's a penalty that was in existing law either. We've had school districts that have inadvertently levied dollars that they weren't authorized to levy, and there really isn't a specific remedy or a penalty in the law to essentially correct that mistake, other than don't do it going forward. I think there's an abatement process that is allowed, that there is allowed for a property owner to make a complaint or bring a petition to the county commission if they feel that their property has been not taxed appropriately. I think in years past, when a mistake has been made, the state tax office, commissioner's office, has said that might be a path to correct it. But I believe that only applies to the previous tax year. So if it's been happening for a handful of years or more, it doesn't really provide a remedy for that entire amount that may have been mislevied. So I guess the short answer is I don't believe there is a specific penalty or a remedy under the law that would apply specifically. That's my opinion.
Okay, any other color?
I agree. I think the main enforcement mechanism is going to be political. It's your voters. You all have sat through this. It's incredibly complicated. But I think if your voters find out that you are over levying, or especially purposefully over levying, there's going to be ramifications for your elected officials. And I've seen similar situations in cities where they levied over their authority, and what ended up happening in those cases were the expectation was in the next year that they would correct that and put that money aside so that they had it for the next period or the next budget year. So I don't think that there is a specific legal remedy to correct this either, but I do think your voters are going to be keeping an eye on this.
When we've had school districts that have voluntarily returned improperly levied dollars to their property taxpayers. That's been kind of a voluntary decision.
Even without the 1176, the remedy is always the problem when it comes to taxation. So let's say you did over levy, and that happens, assuming it's not intentional. Who gets the credit? How do you write the check back, even if you did have that money? If somebody just moved into town, do they get the credit? So just the remedy is almost impossible. So really you trust the voters to take care of the issue if it looks like somebody is just incompetent or intentionally misrepresenting what they should be doing. I would guess the state auditor would have a nasty report on you that would go out to the taxpayers. I don't know of any taxpayer specific cause of action to try to get their money back if you overcharge them. They certainly could have some sort of injunction to stop you from doing it before you collected it, but I don't see what the long-term remedy would be.
Yeah, good answers from 3 attorneys. So one thing I think about with the court of public opinion is this is a 3% cap, but it's not a 3% cap on every parcel. And it's not per parcel either, it's on the budget. So as we think of communication and dealing with the public, that's something that everybody here definitely needs to be communicating. So now it's time for you to answer questions or ask questions, and they'll answer. So are there things that came up today that you didn't get answered? I mean, this is something online too. I can look any question that you have. Maybe while you're thinking of it, anything that you heard today that you'd like to address further?
Well, yeah, a lot, but the lodge is right next door, so.
We'll let Aaron go first, then we'll get over here.
I do want to bring this because I do have it on my notes, and I don't know what the right way to do this is yet, but we need to figure out a way to document the impact of 1176. As of right now, the execs here are thinking of ways we can get data from you, because ultimately, whether this is positive or negative, I know legislators are going to want to know how this happened. Now, it's a little more difficult because you're trying to prove something in the negative. So I'm not sure if I need a lot of emails saying my commissioner was going to give me a 10% raise, but only gave me 3 because of the cap. I don't know if that's going to be necessarily helpful, but maybe if you said we had a motor grader Every 3 years we traded it in because that's our lease schedule, and now we have to go to 5 years or something because we can't make the numbers work. That will be helpful. Hopefully we can just basically design a system where it's a log in and put your concerns or those kind of things, and then we'll consolidate it and then get that information to the legislature. That's going to be my number one takeaway for all of us, is what is the impact on how this works.
Go ahead, Linda.
So in my conversation with Linda this week, or last week, the question is on the long-term, on the debt repayment that is excluded. Does that include like your like you just talked about leases on motor graders. So on my long-term debt with the state auditors, my 3 leases on motor graders are part of my long-term debt worksheet. Does those repayments also get excluded on that calculation? Just bond payments or bond and lease payments?
Wanda, that's a great question. I'm looking through it. Again, if you're following the bill, page 21, section 22 is basically the section we're living and dying in. I don't believe if you're paying off something non-voter approved bond-wise that it falls within those categories. I'd have to think a little closer on that. Taxes levied to pay bonds, evidence of indebtedness, obligations. Those are very specific and not just paying off your motor grader lease. Now, in theory, I suppose, judgments, and that is 2I section, judgments are exempt from the levy. So I suppose in theory, you could stop paying and Caterpillar sues you and they get a judgment. I suppose you could do that, but that's not great either.
A new style repayment plan.
I love the attorney advice there.
So
Yeah.
I think this is an area that is a bit unclear in the bill. I think what they had intended to say was that property tax that was pledged to pay indebtedness would be what is exempted under this. That's not what the language says. It says dollars that are levied to pay bonded indebtedness, certificates of indebtedness. So I think this is kind of one of those gray areas that you likely, if it's an area you want to get into and need to use, you probably need to get specific advice from your particular attorney on whether they are interpreting it, because I do think that that is a potential gray area.
All right. Any other questions from the audience? No, Stephanie or Amy, anything you'd like to say from what you heard today, or points you'd like to make?
Well, I think this has probably been cleared up, hopefully today, just by the discussion. But I think throughout the legislative session, there was this idea that voter-approved levies were exempt from the caps. And that is not a general proposition that's supported by the bill. How that comes into play for school districts is our building fund levy is a voter-approved levy. But it is not exempt from the caps. It is subject to the 3% cap. Now, we get we have the authority to levy up to 20 mills for our building fund. And so if your district has never asked for authority to levy for your building fund, and you go to the voters and ask for levying authority, that new levying authority would be exempt for the first year that you levy it. And then after that, it would be included in your calculation for the 3% cap. If you've had authority to levy 10 and you've only levied 8 and you decide you want to max out, that 2 additional levy isn't new or increased levying authority. You already had that levying authority. And so that would, that 3% cap could limit your ability to capture those two more mills. If you've had authority to levy 10 and you go to your voters and want to increase that to the full 20 and they approve that, the first 10 is subject to the caps, but the new 10 that you're levying wouldn't be subject to the cap that first year. So that's a question that I've gotten a lot from school districts trying to understand this bill, that there's this general proposition that voter-approved levies are not subject to the caps. Now, we also have a provision, I think that's only applicable to school districts, that you can exceed your levying authority for up to 10-year period with voter approval. And we have, I think, 2 districts that still levy beyond. If I'm right, Brant, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but those are not exempt from the 3% cap either. And so that's just something to keep in mind. I just wanted to dispel the general proposition that voter-approved levies are not subject to the cap.
The question that I have is it's 3% in whole. So in other words, if you were at 60, I'll use schools again, that's 60 general fund, and you're at 8 miscellaneous and 5 building fund, could you take 5 from your miscellaneous, assuming you have 10, 5 from your miscellaneous and move it to the building fund? Is that correct? You can move among that as long as you're within the 3% total calculation.
Yeah, yes, I would agree with that. The only thing I would say is, building fund is the purposes for which you can use the funds are limited. So I would see that it would maybe go the other way, where you would move mills from your building fund to your miscellaneous, so that you have more options to use those dollars. But yes, it could go either way, because the cap is calculated on the total dollars levied. Yeah.
100% agree with that. On a 30,000 foot level, it's the total mills, as long as you're not interfering with other laws that were on the books on how to spend those mills. Yeah, you would have that flexibility. 100% agree.
Go ahead.
So I'm a superintendent, so when we calculate our 3% overage, do we need to do that for each one of our individual levies, building, miscellaneous, or it is just the total amount?
Just the total dollars levied.
To me, when Linda was explaining this, I almost kind of got chills, because it's kind of like how I do my federal taxes. In a way, it really is, right? You get your gross income, and then you get your adjusted gross income after taking off your deductions, and then you get your total tax bill, and then you get your credits. So I think that is just kind of how it ended up working. So if you think of it like that, it makes a lot more sense.
Go ahead, Adam.
Just to comment on the last question about the overall, just keep in mind the gap funding, that if it does require you to go less than 60 mils, you do have to also reduce those other ones proportionally. And again, I'm just going to look at particularly the 60 mils and the rest of them. So if you switch between your building fund and your miscellaneous, that's not as important. But as long as that 60 mils isn't going down more than the rest of your discretionary mills.
And Adam, really the gap funding was to capture the situation where your values are increasing beyond the 3%. And so it's pushing that 60 mil general fund levy down below 60, but yet we're still deducting or reducing your state aid payment, or assuming that there's a 60 mil contribution from the local side. And so that's the whole purpose. So if the reason your 60 mil general fund levy is decreasing is because essentially your property tax values are pushing that 60 mil fund down, right? That's really the only time that 60 mil or that gap funding program should kick in.
Yes, that is correct. So I just want to make that clear, that if you're only levying 6 mils in your miscellaneous and you decide to move that to 12 and you're 60 down to 54, you can do that. You're just not going to be eligible for the gap funding for those 6 mils.
Good.
All right, another question on the county side. So when I'm looking at this 3% cap, do I need to split that out from, do I need to do separate calculations for my general fund levy versus my road and bridge levy versus, for instance, my veteran service levy? Or do I take the whole lump sum as a whole? Do I calculate it per levy?
I'll leave the specific details to Linda on that, but generally it doesn't matter how you come up with that number, as long as the total number is not more than 3%.
I would, in answer to your question, Aaron's right. It's on the total dollars for, but if you want to in your county look at individual levies, the general fund separate, and kind of monitor it that way, you certainly can. But the calculation is on the total dollars. Now, if I remember in Burley County, you've got quite a bit of unorganized township road levy. That you'll have to calculate separately because it doesn't apply to, it's not a county-wide entity. So you'll do that separately on unorganized township road. But otherwise, I forget if you had another. You might have had one other that was, yeah. But yes, yes, it's on the total.
One thing kind of along that line for cities, included within your capped mills are going to be the library fund, the cemetery fund, and the airport fund. So those are independent boards that, as I understand how most cities are operating, like the library board comes in and asks for their 4 mills and assumes that they're going to get a total of 4 mills. This changes that. So they're going to be calculated in your 3% cap, and you're going to get a total amount of dollars on all those capped levies, and it's going to be up to your city governing board to determine how to split out those dollars. So I think if I were with a city, I'd be communicating with those I'm going to call them sub boards, to make sure that they understand that there is no guarantee that they're getting their full allotted maximum mills this year. They are under the cap, and there's no necessarily guarantee that they're going to get a 3% increase on the dollars they levied last year. They could, your board could decide to do that, but there's no guarantee.
I agree with that. And then this is not really for today's discussion, but thinking long term, if this is the way we still operate local government, you really do start questioning, well, what is the idea of then having mill levy breakouts for all these separate mills? Why not just set a cap of how much you can spend and let the local decide where to put it? So, but that's for another long-term discussion.
All right, we have another question, Linda.
Yes, I was just asked whether or not the caps apply to soil conservation districts, and they do. Soil conservation districts are also a not to exceed mill levy authority. They might feel differently, but our interpretation is that the caps apply to soil conservation districts.
Maybe somebody here can just address in general who this applies to.
Every single political subdivision are now capped at 3%, unless they are not capped at 3%. So the answer, but
why didn't you say that first, Aaron? We could be gone a long time ago.
But the legal answer is there's nobody excluded from caps in the bill from political subdivisions. The medical center is excluded from the cap, kind of, sort of. By the way, we've tried to get that repealed for 2 sessions now and can't even get 1 mill off the books. Anyway, I digress. They are in it.
More great attorney advice there, just pointing out.
Yeah, and just so you know, you're going to get a bill in the mail from the 3 up here per hour. Yep. So that's why we're dragging it on as long as we can.
Yep.
All right, any other questions from the crowd? All right, any closing comments from our illustrious panel up here?
I think it's great seeing the participation. I don't know if you had the numbers, but we were at like 700 between in-person and online, right?
Yeah, we hovered right about 400 online today. We hit about 422, and we're at about 335 now. They've been tailing off once you guys got up here.
So
that's because Linda answered all of our questions. She did a great job.
So, I mean, I think it's great that everybody is tuning in and paying attention, and everybody we're going to have to do the best we can with the numbers. I think we're going to probably trip a few times, but I'm happy to see how attentive everybody was and that everybody wants to do it right and wants to know what the correct way to do it is.
Yes, very true. Well, let's give these guys and gals a round of applause. They're going to earn more money up here.
All right, just one final thought, and maybe just turn the mic off. This is obviously maybe a little negative because it really is moving people's cheese. But on the bright side, I do think that there's a collective opportunity that we've been working together closer than ever before. And I think taxpayers are going to start expecting the schools and the cities and the counties and all the other political subdivisions to start talking a little more before tax season. I think this forces that. So that's something to consider. And the last thing, we're only talking 1176, but now all the bond issues have to be done on your primary or your general fund, so your general elections. So again, that's a game changer that all of us will have to work through. But it's definitely a new day for local government.
All right. Thanks again. Thank you, guys.